Just because summer's over doesn't mean we still can't have a healthy dose of camp, because it's Dramatis Personae. And this week we are revisiting one of the loveliest, one might say merriest episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, QPid. Now, for those of you who are tuning in to Dramatis Personae for the first time on Facebook Live, we are a bi-weekly Star Trek reenactment and discussion and analysis show. We have a repertory cast of all amateur actors and professional strength Star Trek fans who reenact. Somebody's pointing out to me that bi-weekly. There are some people, there's a constant debate whether bi-weekly means every 2 weeks or twice a week. Every 2 weeks, fortnightly. We should use fortnightly in American parlance. It is a fortnightly Star Trek reenactment and discussion show where our repertory cast, we reenact some of our favorite episodes from every Star Trek series, and we discuss and dissect the cultural and political messages within, both overt and covert. Joining me is all of the big heavy hitters. Can somebody please pull up the cast list in our little Zoom chat, just so I can make sure to introduce everybody with the proper names. So just as I said, we're doing QPid. For those of you who don't know, this is an episode where the Enterprise D is once again visited upon by the omnipotent rascal known as Q, who notices. And so now, let me introduce to you the cast who will be performing and then subsequently discussing this episode with you. After everybody please unmute yourself, and when I introduce your name, say hi, so that way everybody sees your lovely mug. So narrating this week, who's unable to turn on his camera, but we still appreciate him anyway. Our narrator is Zack Coates. Say hi, Zack.
Hi, Zack.
Thank you, Gracie. Playing our captain, our continuous, fearless leader, Becks Flatt, playing Picard.
Hello.
Playing our ship's counselor, Deanna Troi, we've got Olivia Astrid.
Hi.
Hello. Playing the mysterious archaeologist and rogue, Vash, we have Casey Lowry.
Hello.
Playing our Dr. Crusher, we've got Steffi.
Hello.
Then we've got, as our dashing first officer, Riker, we've got Leta Chrisman.
Hello.
Playing a nameless crewman, but a very, very worthy of name and acclaim. We've got Randall C. Brown.
Hello.
Playing Chief Engineer Geordi LaForge, and getting that loot, we've got Maksim Rex.
Howdy.
Playing Operations Officer Data, we've got Ben Church.
Greetings.
Playing Worf, we've got Lael Newton.
Hello.
Playing said omnipotent, interdimensional, just adorable rascal Q, we've got Robbie Laughton.
I am an adorable rascal.
Playing Sir Guy of Gisborne, we've got JB Flatt.
Hello.
Playing the Nursie, we've got, as it's listed in the cast list, I don't know if that's a typo or just the amount of affection we want to imbue with the name given to one of our favorites, David X. Crowe.
Hey, everybody.
And then, of course, me playing the ship's computer in this voice, in this episode. We've got me, Angel M. Castillo. I am your host every fortnight. So before we start the episode, first I just want to give a shout out to our fearless leader, our producer, Carl St. Lucie, who's always working behind the scenes, making sure everything is working on the stream. We are streaming every fortnight, every 2 weeks on Facebook Live, and every episode we are always raising money for a progressive cause. And this episode, as it has been for the past few episodes, we are raising money for the Transgender Law Center. So for those of you who are just hearing about this, let me tell you a little bit about them. Transgender Law Center changes law, policy, and attitudes so that all people can live safely, authentically, and free from discrimination, regardless of their gender identity or expression. And given recent events in the news that have made a lot of people very anxious about the state of protections in the United States over gender and sexuality, I think it's very important that we pitch in and help volunteer organizations that specifically work to protect the most vulnerable. So if you are watching us on Facebook Live, there will be a Tiltify link in the comments where you can go to donate money. And when you donate, we'll give you a little shout out during the stream. And right now, I do want to give a shout out to the people who are in the chat right now. Alejo, we've got Alejo in the chat. We've also got Jeremy. Thank you all so much for watching. And Alex, hello. If you have any kind of comments or questions that you might want us to discuss when we get to our post-show discussion, feel free to sound off in the chat. We might get to them. You know what? I think I should stop blabbing and get to flinging the arrow from the bow of Cupid. Take it away, Zack.
We open on Enterprise in orbit of a lilac, white, and lime green planet.
Captain's log, stardate 44741.9. We have arrived at Tegus 3, where the Enterprise is to serve for the host of the Federation Archaeology Council's annual symposium. I look forward to giving tomorrow's keynote address with great anticipation.
Picard is hard at work at his desk in the ready room when the door chime goes.
Come.
I thought you would like to know that the council members have been aboard and have been assigned to their quarters.
Excellent.
Captain, it really is quite late.
Tell me, Counselor, with regard to my lecture, what do you think would provide greater clarity? A chronological structure, or the division of each excavation's findings into various religious, sociological, and environmental subgroupings?
I thought you had already decided on a chronological structure.
There is something to be said for a more scientific approach.
May I make a suggestion?
By all means.
Relax. You've written a brilliant speech.
It will need to be. Tomorrow, I'll be addressing some of the greatest scientific minds in the Federation. Switzer, Clarkton, Droth, McFarland, giants in the field of archaeology. Compared to them, I'm just an enthusiastic amateur.
I doubt they'll see you as an amateur, not when it comes to Targus 3.
Well, it's true. I have done my homework, and I have examined the findings of every archaeology expedition conducted on the planet's surface.
It is unfortunate that they no longer allow outsiders to visit the ruins.
Indeed, especially since we know so little about their origins. But I think that I have constructed some plausible theories of my own.
And I'm sure the council members will agree with you.
Your support is appreciated, Counselor.
Now good night, Captain.
Troi walks out and Picard swigs the last of his Earl Grey. Picard is still tapping at a pad when he walks into his quarters later, and he turns the lights down a little. Then he notices a Horgon sitting on the table and picks it up, smiling.
Bring back any memories?
Vash, how did you get in here?
I came in through the window.
They kiss. Picard drops the Horgon, and we fade to black at the end of the teaser. Act 1 opens with Picard pouring Vash some tea as they sit down for breakfast croissants. Guess what happened between the kiss and breakfast?
I had no idea you were a member of the Archaeology Council. You are a member, aren't you?
More or less.
Why did you come to Tagus 3?
To see you, of course.
Is that the only reason?
Isn't it enough?
I wish I could believe you.
I really have missed you, Jean-Luc.
There's a pregnant pause. The doorbell sounds. Picard looks nauseated.
Excuse me.
Picard goes to the door and Beverly Crusher is leaning against the door jamb.
I'm sorry I'm late. Oh, excuse me. I didn't realize you had company.
That's all right. Allow me to introduce you. This is Beverly. Dr. Beverly. Dr. Beverly Crusher. This is Vash. She's a friend of mine from the Archaeology Council.
I didn't mean to interrupt. The captain and I often share morning tea together.
Yes, I know. Jean-Luc has told me all about you.
Really? When was that?
On Risa, where we met.
I see. That must have been during your vacation last year.
No. Yes. Yes.
Well, I'm surprised he never mentioned you.
There is a meaningful pause.
So am I. Doctor, are you busy?
Not at the moment.
I was wondering, I would love to see some more of this marvelous ship.
I would be delighted to show it to you. That is, if it's all right with Jean-Luc.
Of course.
Don't worry. I promise to behave myself.
Vash and Crusher enter 10 forward. Riker notices Vash with a double take as he sits at the bar.
And this is 10 forward, where the council's welcoming reception will be held today.
Well, I can't think of a better location. Tell me, does Jean-Luc come here often?
Not often. The captain is a very private man. Would you like something to drink?
Please.
Riker approaches Vash as she looks out the window at the stars.
Eternity never looked so lovely.
Excuse me?
I was referring to the view. Eternity never looked so lovely.
You must be Commander Riker.
I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I believe you were about to tell me that my eyes are as mysterious as the stars?
Your Betazoid?
Not at all. It's just that Jean-Luc does a very good imitation of you.
He does?
I see you two have met.
Not exactly.
This is Vash, a member of the Archaeology Council and a friend of the captain's.
So I've gathered.
They met during his visit to Risa.
On Risa? That vacation must have been better than he let on.
You mean he never mentioned me to you either?
Dr. Crusher, please report to sickbay.
I'm afraid I won't be able to finish our tour, but perhaps Commander Riker could take over for me?
It would be my pleasure.
Vash and Riker enter the bridge via the main turbolift.
This is the main bridge, the command center of the Enterprise, and our last stop. Vash, Commander LaForge.
Vash.
Hello.
Commander Data.
Hello.
How do you do?
And this is Lieutenant Worf.
Hello.
Something wrong, Lieutenant?
I had not been informed that council members had been granted bridge clearance.
Well, I think we can make an exception in this case. Vash is a guest of the captain.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Is this where Jean-Luc sits?
That's the big chair.
Vash walks over to the captain's chair and tries it out, curling her feet up into the seat.
Well, I can see where being a starship captain has its rewards.
I'm glad you approve.
I suppose I'll go back to my room now and get ready for the reception.
By all means. Well, I suppose I'll see you then.
I look forward to it.
Vash leaves. Riker and Worf look at each other, amused.
Fascinating woman.
Vash and Troi are conversing at the reception, next to mostly empty platters and a bowl of red apples.
I don't understand. I thought being the ship's counselor meant the captain confided in you.
He does, when he thinks it's necessary.
And he never spoke to you about me?
Not that I recall.
Not even a hint?
You must understand, the captain is a very private
man. I know. Excuse me?
Of course.
Troi joins Worf, Data, and LaForge.
Nice legs. For a human.
Vash approaches Picard, who is talking to another guest.
Jean-Luc, we need to talk.
Excuse me.
They go to a quiet corner.
The reception seems to be going well.
Forget the reception for a moment. Why have you never mentioned me to your friends?
What would you have me tell them?
That we met, for one thing. That we had an adventure together, some fun.
It wouldn't be possible.
Why not?
It would be inappropriate.
I wasn't expecting you to go into intimate details.
A captain does not reveal his personal feelings to his crew.
Is that a Starfleet regulation, or did you make that up yourself?
I'm sorry you're upset.
And I'm sorry if my being here embarrasses you.
Vash stalks off. Picard enters and heads straight for the ready room. Riker looks up from a pad.
How was the reception?
Splendid.
Picard enters his ready room to find Q sitting in his chair.
Jean-Luc, it's wonderful to see you again. How about a big hug?
And on that bombshell, we end Act 1. Q with his feet up on Jean-Luc's desk.
Why does Captain Picard feel like his authority will be undermined if the crew knows that he fucks? We'll find out more as we return to the episode, but as usual, we will take a little break to remind everybody that we are raising money for the Transgender Law Center. I will tell you a little bit more about them, just using their own words from their website. For almost 2 decades, the Transgender Law Center has led the country in challenging the legal system to respect the dignity and humanity of transgender and gender nonconforming people. Our impact litigation in areas like employment, education, and immigration have redefined transgender people's experience of rights and justice in the U.S. Our legal services project introduces guides and resources connecting countless people to the relief and rights they need, and operates TLC's legal help desk, which has supported thousands of people battling injustice over the last decade. So, if you are a person who is trans or gender nonconforming and that has introduced legal difficulties into your life, definitely look to TLC as a possible resource in making sure you get the justice you deserve. And otherwise, if you want to contribute some money to this very important work, please look down in the Facebook comments and look for the Tiltify link, and you'll be able to donate right there. Once again, thanks everybody for watching the stream. Thanks to everybody watching in the chat. And we will now participate in Act 2. Take it away, Zack.
Act 2 opens in the ready room with Q taunting Picard.
Well, don't just stand there. Say something.
Get out of my chair!
Oh, and I was hoping for something more along the lines of, welcome back, Q. It's a pleasure to see you again, my old friend.
We're not friends.
You wound me, mon capitaine.
Q snaps his fingers and he and Picard switch places.
There. Perhaps now your manners will show some improvement.
What brings you here, Q? Have you been banished by the Continuum once again?
Oh, hardly. They're still apologizing to me for the last time.
Then what is it you want?
Do I always have to have a reason to stop by? I was merely in the sector. You force a confession from me. The truth is, I have a debt to repay.
A debt?
To you. And it gnaws at me. It interferes with each of my days.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Without your assistance at our last encounter, I never would have survived. I would have taken my own life but for you.
We all make mistakes.
Your good deed made possible my reinstatement in the Continuum, and I resent owing you anything. So I'm here to pay up. Tell me, what is it you wish, and I'll be gone.
Just be gone. That'll do nicely.
No. It has to be something more constructive. That's my new word for the day.
Some other time, Q. Right now, I have other matters to attend to.
Yes, your speech. I read it. It's dull, plodding, pedantic, much like yourself. I could help you with it.
No, thank you.
You've never actually been to the ruins at Tegas 3, have you?
No, they were sealed off more than a century ago.
Q lies down on the couch, ready to be painted like one of Picard's French girls.
Well, that explains it then. How can you write about something that you've never seen? I know. Why don't I take you there?
There is a flash, and Q is now suddenly wearing a safari suit, complete with pith helmet and shorts.
Out of the question. That would be breaking Taguan law.
Must you always be so ethical? I suppose we could travel back in time. You could see what Tegas was like 2 billion years ago. Oh, they really knew how to party back in those days.
My answer is still no. My lecture will have to stand on its own.
Picard stands.
Now, will you please leave my ship?
You are simply the most impossible person to buy a gift for.
Q disappears. In a flash of light, Picard gathers himself for a couple seconds.
Commander Riker, will you report to my ready room?
Riker enters.
Yes, Captain.
I've just been paid a visit from Q.
Any idea what he's up to?
He wants to do something nice for me.
I'll alert the crew.
Picard walks down the hallway as a crewman passes by.
Captain.
Picard watches the crewman go around the corner. Once there's no one else in sight, Picard walks back in a different direction than the one he came from and rings a door chime.
Who's there?
Picard leans into the door, trying to be discreet.
It's me.
Who?
Jean-Luc.
Vash opens the door.
Yes.
May I come in?
Vash thinks for a couple of seconds, then stands aside and Picard enters.
Let me try to explain. I am by no means embarrassed by your presence here. On the contrary.
He spots a pad on the table.
What's this? A map of the ruins? I thought that I was the only reason you came to Tegas.
I never fooled you for a second. Still, you are the most important reason.
Am I?
That's the trouble with being such a well-known liar. Even when I'm telling the truth, no one believes me.
Picard goes into the next room and comes out with a shovel and some other device.
This equipment will have to be confiscated.
Is that necessary?
If the Taguans were to catch you down there.
Oh, come on. You gave me the same warning about Sarathon 5.
I remember.
Well, it didn't stop me from going there. I brought back some very impressive artifacts, too.
Which no doubt you sold for a very impressive profit.
It's what I do.
Not on board my ship. I will not allow it.
Let's get one thing straight, though, Picard. I cannot change who I am for you or anyone else.
Nor can I change who I am.
Then we have nothing more to say to one another.
Picard turns, opens the door, and turns back.
So it would seem.
Picard leaves, and Vash sits in a chair, exasperated. Q pokes his head through the hull and smiles. Later, in Picard's quarters, Jean-Luc climbs into bed at the end of a busy day, wearing turquoise pajamas with a neckline that goes down to his navel. He barely has time to rest his head on his pillow when there's a flash, and Q appears, lifts up the covers, and peeks underneath.
Sleeping alone?
I'm in no mood for your foolishness, Q.
I knew there was something different about you. You seem tense, preoccupied, somewhat smaller. At first I thought it was that horrible lecture of yours, but I was mistaken.
Picard rolls away from Q.
Whatever game you want to play will have to wait until tomorrow.
Q climbs onto the bed next to him anyway.
I had such high hopes for you, Picard. I thought you were a bit more evolved than the rest of your species. But now I realize you're just as weak as all the others. Still, it pains me to see the great Jean-Luc Picard brought down by a woman.
Picard's eyes open abruptly.
What woman?
Don't play coy with me, Captain. I witnessed your little spat with Vash, nor will I soon forget the look of anguish on your face. The pain, the misery. If I didn't know better, I would have thought you were already married.
Picard gets out of bed in disgust and walks into the living area.
You must be very bored, Q. Your imagination running away with you.
This human emotion, love, is a dangerous thing, Picard, and obviously you are ill-equipped to handle it. She's found a vulnerability in you, a vulnerability I've been looking for years. If I had known sooner, I would have appeared as a female.
Picard sits down at his desk and starts examining a pad, somewhat more urgently than is necessary.
Mark my words, Picard. This is your Achilles heel.
Believe what you wish.
Do you deny that you care for this woman? Believe me, I'd be doing you a big favor if I turned her into a Klabnian eel.
Stay away from her, Q.
I was just trying to help. My debt to you is...
hereby nullified. I don't want your help, your advice, your favors, or for that matter, you. Do you understand? Once and for all.
You would have me stand idly by as she led you to your destruction?
Yes!
As you wish.
The conference room looks remarkably like the ship's theater, filled with various civilians greeting each other. A low murmur of anticipation. Picard enters, stiffly, in his dress uniform, and strides purposefully to the podium. The senior staff are sitting at the back of the room. The room quiets, and Riker walks in, as Picard sets his pad upon the lectern.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Archaeology Council, welcome. Mystery. It is the mystery of Tegus 3 that brings us together today. It is a mystery that has invited more argument, more deduction, more speculation than the best works of fiction. And if you will excuse the conceit, I want to tell you about my detective story. For several years now, I have been trying to unravel the secrets of Tegus 3.
There's a flash, and a green feather hat appears on Crusher's forehead. Troi's eyes are drawn to it.
Needless to say, I've not succeeded.
Another flash, and Troi gets a red hat. She reaches up and touches it in astonishment. Crusher sees it, turns away, and then notices her own hat out of the corner of her eyes, and reaches up to it.
However, I have, I believe, turned up some new information that, if nothing else, raises a new set of mysteries, and I hope that we can discuss them here together.
Another flash, and Riker acquires a quarterstaff.
There have been 947 known archaeological excavations conducted on the planet's surface.
Another flash, and this time Data gets a monk's habit.
Of those, some 74 are generally believed to have revealed findings of major importance.
Data takes a breath as if he was about to say something and realizes he is holding a leg of roast meat and just looks confused instead.
The earliest was some 22,000 years ago.
Picard notices what he has been happening to his staff, and he looks quizzically at them. Members of the Archaeology Council turn to look at the senior staff as well. Another flash, and he is suddenly dressed in an Errol Flynn-era clothing with a longbow.
What the hell?
Another flash, and Picard disappears and reappears in a heavily Hollywoodized version of Sherwood Forest. A couple of seconds later, the rest of the senior staff, also bedecked in a historical period costume, all flash into existence next to him, looking quite confused.
Q!
And on this exclamation of frustration, we end Act 2.
Well then, it looks like Q, in a scheme to get Picard to stop hiding his horny, has thrust him into one of the horniest circumstances possible, a Renaissance fair? We'll find out about that more as we return to the episode, but once again, it's a little break to thank the people who have been donating to Transgender Law Center so far. Want to give a big shout out to Alex Hasselett, who has donated $20. And that's brought our total up to $110 for Transgender Law Center. Again, if you want to donate, the link to our Tiltify platform where we are raising that money is down in the comments. I'll take a little bit to talk about some projects that Transgender Law Center does, like their disability project. From their website, how is a Transgender Law Center through a 2019 Soros Justice Fellowship, the Disability Project magnifies the leadership, collective power, and visibility of LGBTQ disabled, deaf, and ill constituents. Led by a multiracial, cross-class, cross-disability advisory board of transgender and gender nonconforming people, the Disability Project embeds disability, deafness, and anti-ableism politics and expertise into LGBTQ movement work. The project breaks isolation, grows connection, and builds leadership within trans, disability, deaf, chronically ill communities. I always talk about this every episode when we reference the Transgender Law Center, but I just think one of the greatest things about them is their commitment to an intersectional analysis of different oppressive frameworks in the United States and how they work to protect and against and dismantle those systems, because if you look all across their website, transgenderlawcenter.org, they never fail to neglect to mention how you can't talk about gender and sexuality justice without talking about immigration justice, without talking about class politics, without talking about disability. So that's why we really, love to support them in our little internet nerd show. So once again, thank you to everybody who's watching. Thank you to everybody who's contributing money. Feel free to chip in a few more dollars at the link down. And now, everybody tune up your loots and get ready as we proceed into the next act of this episode. Take it away, Zack.
Act 3, thus being the third act reach, opens in a verdant wooden setting, with Picard and the senior staff fully decked out in period attire. Worf dressed in a delightful shade of scarlet with a leatherette cowl, joins the main group with Data in a monk's habit and trouser, strides up the woodland path towards them.
Is this Targus 3?
I doubt there are many oak trees on Tigis. No, I think this is supposed to be Earth, somewhere around about the 12th century.
Riker wanders up to join Troi and Picard. Picard pulls on Riker's animal skin jerkin.
And this is England, or to be more precise, Sherwood Forest, or at least Q's recreation of it.
That would explain these costumes.
Quite right, number one. Or should I say, John Little.
Well, if he's Little John, that makes you...
I know. Robin Hood.
Sir, I protest. I am not a merry man.
On the contrary, Lieutenant Worf, your clothing identifies you with the character of Will Scarlet, just as Geordie's mandolin identifies him as Alan Adale.
And you, Mr. Data, bear a striking resemblance to Friar Tuck.
I will not play the fool for Q's amusement.
Worf throws his pork pie hat on the ground in disgust, and as a horse whinnies in the background and hoofbeats approach, a noble wearing a most impractical clothes possible for horsemanship, sleeves a flapping, rides into view, and draws a sword.
I have you at last, Robin Hood.
Worf draws his sword in response and runs up to the noble. They cross swords as Sir Guy is mounted and Worf is from the ground. Sir Guy slashes Worf on the shoulder, who falls down on the ground. Norman soldiers appear and fire their arrows at our heroes. Fortunately, their aim is about as good as the aim of stormtroopers from that other Star franchise.
Quick, into the forest!
The crew runs into the tree line as Worf continues his disadvantaged fight with a noble on horseback.
Mr. Worf, that's an order!
Worf finally abandons the hopeless sword fight and runs into the forest, followed by the Norman archers.
Enough, you fools!
The Norman archers stop and look back at their leader.
We'll never find them in the greenwood.
Sir Guy looks angrily at the woods as he starts his horse walking down the bridleway. Later, in a forest glade, LaForge is plucking at his mandolin and Riker is cuddling his fighting pick. Data is teaching Troi how to restring a longbow. Crusher is tending to Worf's wound, with blood still leaking through the improvised bandage. As Picard walks up to them,
I've managed to stop the bleeding.
as Crusher thoughtfully slaps Worf on his recent wound, they look up at the sound of hoofbeats and a horse whinnying. They look concerned, not being able to see anything approaching, when a white horse and its rider flash into the glade out of thin air.
Q, it's about time you showed up.
I would prefer you addressed me as His Honor, the High Sheriff of Nottingham.
We will no longer share in this pointless fantasy of yours.
Fine. Stay here and do nothing. By midday tomorrow, your crew will be safely aboard their ship. Of course, you will have to accept the consequences of your inaction.
Consequences?
What is the one thing that Robin Hood is most famous for?
I rob from the rich and give to the poor.
Q looks disgusted at something mentioning the basic principles of socialism, who is continuously composed in a capitalist enterprise.
Besides that socialist nonsense.
Perhaps you are referring to the rescue of Maid Marian from Nottingham Castle.
Yes, Data. And it just so happens that Sir Guy of Gisborne has decreed that Marian's head shall come off tomorrow at noon.
Vash.
It's your choice, Robin. You can either take your ease in this sylvan glade, or risk your life to save the woman you care nothing about.
My feelings towards Vash are irrelevant. I would attempt to save any innocent life, as you well know.
Q crosses his leg on the back of the horse.
Yes, but what about your merry men? Are you willing to jeopardize their lives as well? Is Vash's life worth more than Data's, or Troy's, or Worf's? You know, Worf, you'd make a perfect throw rug in Nottingham Castle.
Worf growls threateningly.
Q, I ask you to put an end to this before someone gets hurt.
Oh, that's impossible. You see, I've given this fantasy, as you call it, a life of its own. I have no more idea what's going to happen than you do. But if one thing I am absolutely sure. If you dare to come to Nottingham Castle, blood will be spilt.
Q and his horse disappear in a flash, whilst Picard looks on, concerned and frustrated. We pan across a lake and up a green bank to a Norman-style 11th century castle, complete with crenellations. Inside, in a dark, candlelit room, Vash is dressed in the garb of a medieval maiden, pink and bejeweled.
Oh, you'll wear yourself out with all that pacing, milady.
I told you to stop calling me that. The name's Vash.
My poor lamb, you've got a brain sickness for sure. Can't I get you something to ease your suffering?
I could use a drink.
Well, I wasn't thinking of spirits, milady, but I have some nice fresh leeches to drain the fever.
Get out!
The door opens and Sir Guy enters.
Oh, her mind's in an awful turmoil, Sir Guy.
Who the hell are you?
Milady, everyone in Nottingham knows Sir Guy of Gisborne.
Sir Guy of what?
Leave us!
The nurse shuffles out with her box of leeches.
Do not mock me, Lady Marion. I'm prepared to offer you one last chance to change your mind. Will you marry me?
Vash slaps his face.
I see. Then the execution will proceed as scheduled.
What execution?
I warn you, Marion, this pathetic attempt at feigning madness will not save your life.
Sir Guy turns and walks to the door.
You mean I'm the one being executed?
Sir Guy jerks open the door to leave.
Sir Guy, wait a minute. Couldn't we talk this over? I admit I haven't been myself lately. Maybe we've both been a bit hasty. Please.
Vash sits on a carved oaken bench and pats the space next to her, looking imploringly at Sir Guy. With a smile, he closes the door and moves to sit next to her, in what appears to be an attempt at sultriness. He takes her hand and kisses it tenderly. Back in the forest glade, Crusher is tending to Worf's sword injury, and LaForge is plucking away at his mandolin. Worf stands up, walks over, takes the mandolin, and smashes it unceremoniously against a tree trunk. There is a pause as he hands it back to LaForge, who looks at it unbelievingly.
Sorry.
As LaForge continues to inspect the damage in stunned silence, Worf strides off, passing a pensive Picard who is sitting on a tree trunk. Troi is still learning to use a bow and arrow. She aims at the tree and hits Data about a 45-degree angle to the left instead.
Data, are you all right?
The arrow impacted just above my 6th intercostal support, penetrating my secondary subprocessor. Fortunately, none of my biofunctions seem affected. Do not be concerned, Counselor. I believe your aim is improving.
As Data hands the arrow back to Troi, Riker, animal skin akimbo, walks up to the troubled Picard.
We've got to get out of here, Captain.
Not we, number one. I want you and the others to stay here until I return.
You're not going to try and save her yourself, sir.
This is not a mission. It's personal. It's between Q and myself. I don't want the rest of you involved.
Captain!
You have your orders, Commander, and I expect you to follow them.
Picard sticks his sword into his leather belt and strides off into the undergrowth dramatically. Back at the castle, in the courtyard, the local executioner is sharpening his axe on a grindstone by torchlight. Q, as the Sheriff of Nottingham, walks in to check on his progress and feels the edge of the blade.
A touch sharper, shall we?
As Q leaves the executioner at the block, Sir Guy leads Vash down the steps and she carries a beautiful bouquet of flowers.
Such benevolence, Sir Guy, allowing the condemned prisoner fresh air.
You're mistaken, Sheriff. Maid Marian has promised to be my wife.
What? But that's impossible.
Not at all. Though I admit a maiden seldom has the opportunity to win herself such a noble husband.
They step up to the table with a fruit bowl. Vash hands Sir Guy a silver goblet and also helps herself to a drink.
A toast to the most beautiful bride-to-be in the whole of England.
Hugh looks alarmed and walks off, taking Sir Guy's goblet from him. Walks over.
Don't drink that. It could be poison.
Have you taken leave of your senses?
A foul scheme of Robin Hood's. She's in league with him, I'll warrant.
Robin Hood? Oh, Robin Hood. Oh, well, that was over long ago.
All of Nottingham knows you're still in love with him.
That's a lie. He bewitched me. He put me under some evil spell.
I suspected as much. You can add sorcery to the list of charges against that rogue.
Sir Guy, if anyone's been bewitched here, it's you.
Sir Guy glares at him and moves as if to draw his sword threateningly.
Silence! Any more impudence and it'll be your head on the block. Guard!
Sir Guy beckons to the guard.
Escort the Lady Marian to her chamber.
But I'd much rather stay with you.
Of course you would, my child, but I have important business to attend to.
Vash demurely kisses him on the cheek and then leaves.
Lovely creature.
Intriguing.
Sir Guy smiles and walks off, whilst Q just looks confused and eventually walks off. A blacksmith working at a fire in the back of the shop turns around and limps forward, tongs in hand, a hood covering his face. As he reaches the camera, it is revealed to us that it is none other than Jean-Luc himself. A short time later, Marian, still dressed in her pink drapery, is doing some more pacing in the candle-lit chamber. She hears a noise outside the window and backs away. As the shadow of a head appears, someone climbs the outside wall and opens the window.
One step closer and I'll scream.
Picard groans as he nearly falls off the ledge outside the window and pulls himself up with his hands on the sill.
Gosh, damn it! It's me!
Jean-Luc! Oh, am I glad to see you. You wouldn't believe what I've been going through.
Picard struggles to climb in through the window.
1 minute I'm on the Enterprise. The next thing I know, I'm here in Nottingham. First, they're going to chop my head off. Now I'm supposed to marry someone named Sir Guy, and everyone insists on calling me Marian.
Picard finally manages to climb into the room.
Yes, I know.
You do? But how?
Picard shrugs, showing off his outfit to her.
You're Robin Hood.
My staff and I were brought here by an old adversary of mine named Q, and I'll tell you the rest of that once we're safe. Come on, we don't have much time.
Picard takes Vash by the hand and leads her towards the window.
And the others are outside?
They're waiting for us back at Sherwood Forest.
Picard climbs up to the window ledge.
You mean you came here alone?
Vash pulls back on Picard's hand.
That's right, now come on.
He jumps back onto the window ledge.
What kind of plan is that?
It's an excellent one if you'll just hurry up.
Vash continues resisting Picard's help.
You do realize our lives are at stake here?
Only too well.
Vash pulls her hand away from him.
And this is the best strategy you could come up with? One man against an entire castle?
You have a better one?
How about this? You go, I'll stay.
And do what?
Marry Sir Guy if I have to.
Well, that's brilliant.
Well, if there's a way to escape, I'll find it eventually, with my head still attached.
You really believe I would leave you here?
I can take care of myself.
You are the most stubborn woman I ever knew.
Picard picks up Vash and puts her over his shoulder.
Hey!
The latch sounds and Sir Guy enters with the guards.
There'll be no escape for you this time, Robin Hood.
Picard spins around to face Sir Guy and, realizing he's outnumbered, puts Vash down.
You stay behind me.
Vash takes Picard's sword and pushes it against his abdomen.
You should have left while you had the chance.
Well done, my dear.
Consider it my wedding gift to you, darling.
Sir Guy gestures to the guards, who make to take Picard away. Sir Guy turns to Vash and kisses her hand adoringly. In the castle courtyard, the guards lead Picard to the dungeon, followed by Sir Guy, and Q is lounging on the steps.
Congratulations, Sir Guy. I see you've snared the jackal.
It's Marion who deserves the credit. Took him with his own sword.
Later, in her chambers, Vash is writing a letter with a quill as a nurse enters.
You sent for me, milady?
I want you to take this letter to Robin's men.
You want me to go to Sherwood Forest at this time of night?
You'll leave immediately.
But it's dark. I'll get lost. Besides, it's not safe. What with all the edge robbers and worse lurking about?
Please, this is urgent.
If you ask me, you'd be better off with Sir Guy. He's got a future. Why, you'll be living in London before you know it.
But you must go, otherwise they'll kill him.
Q, as the sheriff, enters imperiously and snaps his fingers.
Everybody out!
The nurse bows out.
How dare you barge in here like this?
I've come to apologize for my harsh words. I had no idea that you were so ruthless.
That's most gracious of you.
I admit I was surprised, but no more surprised than Jean-Luc.
You're Q.
Yes, and you are a very interesting woman.
Q's eyes wander to the letter in Vash's hand.
What is this?
He snatches it from her.
Give that to me!
She makes to get the letter back, but fails.
A letter to Riker! Come, quick to the castle, save the captain! Why, this is wonderful! What marvelous duplicity! You certainly fooled Sir Guy, and me as well. I think you're worth further study.
Am I?
Yes, but unfortunately, we just don't have the time. Guards!
The door bursts open and 2 guards enter.
Take this traitor away. It appears there's going to be a double execution.
And as the camera watches Q reread Vash's letter, he smiles satisfied, and we end Act 3.
Are we about to see Q's amateur production of 2 prisoners, 1 chopping block? That is to be seen as we return to the final act of the episode. Once again, I want to give a shout out to everybody who's watching along on Facebook Live. I believe we've got Alejo, we've got Alex. Who else do we got in the chat? Let's see. Give a little shout out, say hi. I know Alex said that he really liked watching us live, and we like you liking us live. A lot of likes going on, a lot of love going on. So before we go back to the concluding act of this episode, sorry, I had a little bit of a brain fart there. I think somebody launched an arrow into my 6th intercostal support. I want to once again talk a little bit about Transgender Law Center. If you go to their website, transgenderlawcenter.com, one of the things they offer is a lot of resources for people with legal questions that have to do with gender and other identity changes. They have a whole page dedicated to identity documents. And they say, many people are surprised to discover that there is no one-stop process for getting a name and or gender marker updated to match their gender identity. This is because the agencies that issue identity documents or keep records of your identity have separate but increasingly networked systems, and there is no central government agency which coordinates all of these databases. For each of these agencies and for every state, there is a different process and a set of required documents a person needs to gather in order to update their name and gender information on record. So on that same page, they have a guide on how to update your federal ID, so like a passport. They have a calendar for when they offer their translegal clinics. They have state-by-state overview of how to change your gender marker on different identifications. There's some California-specific stuff. I know I'm in California, so if anybody's watching in California, they talk about the Gender Recognition Act of 2017, SB 179, and how to legally change your name while incarcerated. And I know that's like, I personally am a prison abolitionist, and in the prison abolitionist discussions, you always hear about the absolute indignities that trans and gender nonconforming people face in America's carceral system. So this kind of information, these kinds of resources, this stuff that Transgender Law Center dedicates themselves to providing, stuff that literally saves lives, stuff that just helps people live a less, live with less fear of violence against them, less fear of just everyday quotidian dehumanization. So please, if you haven't yet, just check out our Tiltify link in the comments. Even if you're watching this, the recording on YouTube, you can still go to Tiltify and donate there. We still have it going even when we're not streaming live. So, if you are like the Dramatis Personae cast in our commitment to defending the most vulnerable and building, the kind of egalitarian and hopeful future that Star Trek inspires, then donate to groups like Transgender Law Center. Now, without further ado, let's return to Act 4 of QPid. Take it away, Zack.
Act 4 opens in the castle's courtyard as 4 cowled monks walk in. The executioner is ready at his block, and various nobles and peasants are wandering around the braziers. Q and Sir Guy enter to observe the execution. As he passes the executioner, Q checks the sharpness of the blade. He is satisfied as the blade apparently draws blood. He and Sir Guy approach the table with fruit and jugs of beverages upon it, Q kissing a servant maid as she passes. Before they sit, ready for a morning's entertainment, the prisoners are escorted to the platform for their moments in the spotlight.
This whole thing is your fault.
My fault?
Yes, your fault.
If you hadn't grabbed my sword, we'd be back in Sherwood by now.
I grabbed your sword to prevent you from being killed.
Oh, really? Not as a wedding present for Sir Guy?
You know I had no intention of going through with that.
Do I? You should never have interfered.
You're the one interfering.
I was just trying to rescue you.
Well, next time, don't bother.
Don't you worry, I won't.
They walk onto the executioner's stage and stand there.
Don't the two of you ever stop arguing? Now, tell me, Robin, as you stand here facing the termination of your insect existence, do you see what brought you to this end? Was she worth it?
Can we just get this over with?
Are you implying that I'm not worth it?
Q, your game was for my benefit. She is innocent in all of this.
She is many things, none of them innocent.
As Q and Picard bicker, the heads of the monks we saw enter are lifted and reveal Riker, LaForge, and Data in disguise.
Let her go.
Jean-Luc, you do care.
A gallant gesture, Robin, but a futile one. Farewell. I hope the two of you are happy together.
Q gestures to Sir Guy.
You have been found guilty of outlawry and high treason. Do you have anything to say before sentence is carried out?
I...
Prepare them for the block.
Off with their heads!
The view cuts to Riker and LaForge taking in the courtyard scene.
There are too many.
Data, we need a diversion now.
As Picard walks towards the block, Data takes a small device from his forearm as Picard kneels, his neck approaching the block. As the headsman raises his axe, Data throws the device into the fire, and there's an explosion. Picard takes this chance to knock the guard off the platform and take the executioner with a kung fu chop. The fight begins as Q enjoys a bunch of white grapes.
Guards, take Marion to the tower.
Picard leaps off the stage towards two guards with their swords drawn. Sir Guy draws his sword and moves towards the fray. Riker and LaForge disrobe and draw their swords before moving towards the action. Meanwhile, Vash disposes one of the guards by kicking him off the ledge, but the other one carries her inside.
I'll have you know, I'm the greatest butter knifesman in all of Nottingham.
Picard assumes a fencing position and looks smug as they duel viciously, swords clanging against each other. Worf and LaForge heroically kill guards with their swords. The action cuts back to Robin and Sir Guy, who are fighting on the steps. Picard's taking the high ground. A guard rounds the corner only for Crusher to smash a pot over his head in a feminine manner, whilst Troi dispatches another guard in a similarly ladylike manner. As they climb the steps, their swords lock.
Very impressive.
And they continue, this time Sir Guy taking the higher ground, whilst Riker fends off a guard with his quarterstaff. Q watches, casually eating a chicken wing. Riker takes out the guard's knees and then hits him around the head, removing him from the fight. Back on the stairs, Picard is all up in Sir Guy's grill.
There's something you should know.
They push away from each other and parry for a while longer before once again locking hilts and coming face to face.
And what would that be?
I'm not from Nottingham.
After a couple more swings of their swords, Picard runs Guy through and Sir Guy falls down the stairs. Surprisingly bloodlessly, but suitably dramatically. Picard looks towards the tower and rushes towards it, ready to save Vash. In her chamber, Vash is standing, looking distressed, and we hear sounds of fighting outside the door. Picard opens it, a dead guard lying in the background.
Jean-Luc!
He walks in manfully, embraces her with one arm around her waist, and they kiss. Picard looks up at the ceiling like he's using a broken holodeck.
It's over, Q. Get us out of here.
As Picard throws away his sword, there's a flash and Q appears, casually sitting on the window ledge.
My compliments, Picard. I doubt Robin Hood could have done much better.
If you have hurt any of my people...
Sadly enough, they're all fine. But my point is that you could have been killed, and so might have you. All for the love of a maid. My debt to you, Picard, is paid. If you've learned how weak and vulnerable you really are, if you finally see how love has brought out the worst in you...
Nonsense! You're absolutely wrong. It's brought out the best in him. His nobility, courage, self-sacrifice, tenderness.
Picard looks down into Vash's face and takes her hand tenderly.
Oh, you're good. You're really good.
Enough of this.
No, indeed.
There's a flash and Picard disappears from the castle and reappears in the conference room, with his senior staff appearing shortly after. The delegates have all gone, and everyone is wearing their uniforms, including Picard in his number 1 uniform.
Everybody here?
Where is Vash?
Computer, locate Council Member Vash.
Council Member Vash is not aboard the Enterprise.
Picard looks concerned and walks out to the conference room. A short while later, Picard enters his ready room and sits down on the couch exhaustedly. Vash appears in a flashy, adorned pith helmet and safari-clothed outfit formerly styled by Q.
Hello, Jean-Luc.
Well, this is a relief. I thought that perhaps Q had found...
Well, he had some things to discuss with me.
Picard looks uncomfortable.
Indeed. Surprised he's not busy gloating over his victory.
He was right about one thing. As ridiculous as it was, his game did prove that you still care.
Picard moves to sit closer to Vash, putting his hand up to her face.
I may not show my feelings to my crew, but I do have them.
I'm going to miss you, Jean-Luc.
So, where are you off to now?
I haven't made up my mind.
Q appears at the other end of the couch, also dressed in a colonialist safari theme.
After all, she has the entire universe to choose from.
Meet my new partner.
Him?
Why not?
I'll tell you why not.
Now, Jean-Luc, let's not be unkind.
He's devious and amoral and unreliable and irresponsible and definitely not to be trusted.
Remind you of someone you know?
As a matter of fact, it does.
We're going to have fun. I'm going to take her places no human has ever seen.
Now, who can resist an offer like that?
As payment in full for your debt to me, you will guarantee her safety.
She will not be harmed, Jean-Luc. I promise you that. Well, are you going to kiss her goodbye?
Both Vash and Picard stare at Q.
All right.
Q vanishes in a flash of light. Vash stands up and walks over to Picard.
Well, aren't you?
Just they are there now, about to kiss. Another flash and Q reappears.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot my hat.
He reaches down, puts on his hat, and taps it, vanishing in a flash of light. Picard and Vash share a tender kiss. Vash walks back to the couch and puts on her hat.
Goodbye, Jean-Luc.
And as Vash disappears in the final flash of light, we inexplicably cut to the Enterprise maneuvering and jumping to warp as the music swells to a triumphant finale. And that is the end of QPid. Back to Angel in the studio.
Thanks, Zack. And truly the greatest tragedy of this episode was that later on, Ben Sisko rejects the offer to join what could have been the galaxy's greatest polycule. That's the end of the episode. Stick around for our post-episode discussion with our repertory cast, but now we're going to throw it to the credits. Stick around. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for watching our repertory cast perform Cupid. And now, last episode, the last couple of episodes we've done have been a little bit more steeped in things like class politics or environmental racism. And so it's nice with this episode to return to classic Dramatis Personae form and unpack some gay subtext. Robbie, I want to start with you. You performed Q with a delightful presentation that I think John Delancey himself would be proud of. Look, I mean, all of us watch this episode and know that it's like they don't even try to hide that Q is horny for Picard. Like it's amazing. Like, people talk about like the homoerotic subtext in Star Trek, but really when you go, I don't know if it's just now like that I go looking for it when I watch it, but sometimes it's not even subtext, it's just text. Give me your reaction to your interpretation of Q when watching the episode and when playing the character.
So I rewatched the episode last night. I don't typically rewatch because I kind of want to just bring my own thing to it, but like John Delancey's so great. I wanted to, get his sort of mannerisms and style in me, puns, as much as possible going into today. And like, I guess I haven't watched this episode in a number of years, certainly not when I've been like looking out for queer subtext and things as much as I am now. But yeah, like that whole scene in the bedroom, especially, Q is just like, what can I do to make you happy? I just want to make you happy. happy. Although oddly, like Picard climbs into his queen-size bed and like stays on one side. It was but a number of years ago, I was in a musical version, an original musical version of the Garden of Eden story, and I was playing the Serpent.
Nice.
The director was like, I just want you to go out. I want you to play your best Disney villain / drag queen. Huh. That's a good direction. And so that's mostly what I was doing here. I was channeling my inner Ursula, who's just in love with Jean-Luc Picard, because who wouldn't be in love with Jean-Luc Picard?
Wait, I have a follow-up question for you, Robbie, which is, if Q did appear as a drag queen in Star Trek, which queen do you think it would be?
No.
Messy ones.
Oh, yeah. One of the not quite so polished ones. You'll have to come back to me. I'll need to think on that a bit.
Okay.
I'm now very curious for, the cast members who are men who love men. Does like Q's behavior here remind you of any particular toxic lovers that you might have had or the just kind of toxic courtship behavior?
I mean, I'll jump in and say that I've certainly been in situations where I've been with someone who's probably not quite feeling it as much as I have. And I've just been like, how can I make you happy? Just what can I do to just show you that I'm here for you?
Same.
Max, what about Q's behavior towards Picard would you maybe identify with based on your own experience?
Definitely a bit of the desperation, especially when before I came out and I was, the whole compulsory heterosexuality. I was very much like that. Was this is how it's supposed to go, and this is what we're gonna do. So, all right. So very much where Q has this idea of how he wants things to go, and he being Q, he gets to manipulate things a bit more than the rest of us, thank God.
By the way, I just want to let the people watching the live stream know that if you've got any questions or comments you want to add to the discussion, throw them down in the chat. We always like to hear what our audience has to offer. But Robbie, you brought up playing channeling like an Ursula or like a Disney villain in general, and so the juxtaposition of the homoerotic subtext with a character like Q, who he's chaotic evil, so maybe not entirely a villain. He is an antagonist, but then of course you have like the period piece setting of Robin Hood. you know, where a lot of like European period pieces do like to have their villains be very like effete and, you know, very campy. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about the queer-coded villains in general. Like, you know, let's see, who was I talking to previously that had a little bit of Lael, you know, Lael, nice to have you back in the regular fold. You returned back to us with the last episode after a little bit of an absence. Tell us what you think about that particular subject.
I'm sorry, I'm really distractible today. Repeat the question, please.
Oh, I just, you know, like, is that in this episode we have both, like Robbie brought up that he was sort of channeling a Disney villain in his performance of Q. And then also, like, we have the Robin Hood setting where, you know, we were reminded of how in, like, European period pieces, you know, villains are often very, like, effete and campy. And so I wanted to, like, I was just thinking a lot about the concept of, like, queer-coded villains. And I wanted to see, like, what your thoughts were on, you know, the queer coding of, like, villains or antagonist characters in this episode or just in the topic in general in Star Trek, you know, what. There's no question, just what are your thoughts on that area?
That's a question. And I'm sorry, I don't have thoughts today. Or I have very specific thoughts and none of them are relevant.
Well, just share a specific thought that you think is irrelevant and we'll make it relevant because I'm a good host, damn it. That's my job.
The only thing I can think about is what I said in the chat earlier about like Vash's like imperialist, like Indiana Jonesy stealing artifacts behavior, which is a totally different topic.
We can switch topics. We can go back and forth. Conversation, much like space-time, is fluid. So why don't you share the comment you made in the chat and we can talk about that.
Yeah, okay, so...
Sorry, like space-time and gender is fluid.
When Picard finds Vash's like shovel and stuff, and he's like, I'm gonna have to confiscate this. You can't be like breaking into the Teguan ruins from my ship. I won't allow that. And she's like, well, I won't change who I am for you or anyone else. And I'm like, okay, but like stealing other cultures' artifacts, like their archaeological artifacts and selling them for your own profit isn't who you are. It's like a behavior that you can choose not to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're doing it and it's bad. So stop.
Yeah, Casey, did you want, since you played Vash, why don't you give us a little comment on that topic?
Yeah, well, like you said, she's a very intriguing person. She's got some problematic aspects to the things that she does. Obviously, the colonialist sort of behavior of stealing artifacts from cultures that don't belong to her and selling them, well, that's not great. But I do want to just point out how she gets put into this situation by Q of like being the damsel in distress. Mm-hmm. But she refuses to play that part, and she kind of sort of forms her own plan to get herself out of this situation. And then later, we also see Picard sort of do the same thing where he comes and he's coming to rescue her, and he even lifts her up and puts her on his shoulder. And she's just like, no, I'm gonna do what I want. And I mean, I think she does a pretty good job at really just refusing to play by the rules that these men have set down for her and finding her own way out. I mean, ultimately her efforts don't completely succeed, but she does impress Q, which is saying something. He normally finds people pretty boring, but he finds her really interesting. And then at the end, we get him offering to take her on adventures, like kind of like a Doctor Who situation, like, oh, let's go, travel in my TARDIS or whatever.
Do you think he takes Vash in the same windowless white van that the Traveler took Wesley in?
Possibly.
Just they should form a team of just like interdimensional space kidnappers.
Well, and I think it actually kind of makes sense for the two of them to get along because they're both honestly, they're both kind of selfish people.
Mm.
I think they would get along pretty well. There's a lot to like about Vash. I enjoy her as a character, but she is pretty selfish. She does what's best for her.
There's definitely an element of like, I am acting selfish, but it's because I live in a selfish world, and that's how I scratch by to survive. Carl, you said you wanted to add a little bit on that subject.
Yeah, and actually, let me see if I can I? Nope, can't spotlight myself. That's okay. So like, I think there's a way to tie this together and say that, like, for me, as I was thinking about your question about like the queer coding of villains, like, I think there's a way in which like queerness under capitalism and under like heteronormativity is chaotic, right? And I think that there's a way in which this episode is sort of a conversation with the chaotic, right? In the way that, like, I mean, take the fact that like Q puts them in a very scripted story that they then have to navigate, right? And the whole thing is absurd and chaotic, right? So I think there's a way in which Picard, who is like all about the rules and all about protocol and all this other stuff, is like sort of coming to grips with his relationship with chaos in that way.
Yes.
And I think that there's something about the way, and notice that the only way that Picard is able to relate to Vash is with her as a damsel in distress. Like, he doesn't know how to relate to this person as like fully in her own agency, fully able to take care of herself. And I think it's nice that in the end, even though it is true that she and Q are both selfish, that like the end of it is kind of like, this is a way in which their relationship is ultimately untenable, right? Because for him, he's so anchored in this narrative of who he has to be, that she can't live with,
Yeah.
Ben, sorry, I think Ben wanted to add a little bit on that topic.
Yeah, it was something that sprung to mind when we were talking about Vash, the behavior of I act selfishly in a selfish world. And what I think is interesting about that is that as far as we're presented, she doesn't live in a selfish world. She's DS9 does finally eventually give us a view of this world, not through the filter of Starfleet, but we still every time we see Vash before that, she lives in the Federation, which is it's not necessary to be selfish or ruthless if you're, as far as we know so far in the series, in the franchise, there is no scarcity, there's no reason. There's the point seems to have been that we've removed the reason for greed, so therefore it doesn't exist anymore, at least not in this society.
Yeah, there seems to be like there's like a strain of certain characters in Star Trek, like say like Harcourt Fenton Mudd and like others who like are humans that seem to specifically like venture outside the Federation so they can like, be in a sort of individualistic struggle. Like they want to escape having, their conditions, their needs for survival being satisfied. Randall, go ahead and respond.
I was gonna say, is it like Eve in the garden? Like in the garden, like all of their like needs are being met, but still like wants more, And I think that kind of links to some of the other stuff we were talking about like the villainization of women, which I think also links to some of the queer coding in villains, because I think it is like a view that sees femininity as evil.
Deviant, yeah.
Well, speaking of women characters who don't have a lot of agency, in Star Trek, Troi. Olivia, why don't you talk a little bit about your like some like what are some thoughts you've had on what we've discussed so far, and if you want to comment a little bit on like Troy's role in the episode and what you perceived about that.
Well, I think my sort of observation of this episode is that it's like the tale of two stories. Almost like at the beginning, it's like Baywatch in space, essentially, for lack of a better word. And interestingly, like
no, which plot are you calling Baywatch in space? I need you to elaborate on that analogy because that's amazing.
Like the whole sort of like dynamic with Picard, with
that's what you mean. Was there a lot of people fucking each other on Baywatch? I never actually watched the show.
Like from what I remember of Baywatch, there was not so much fucking, but more like there was a lot of action. Let's just put it that way.
All right.
Yeah, and I guess like the other episode, like the other sort of like part where we're all in like where we're all in Nottingham. Like one of the things that really came to me, especially like sort of bringing my Britishness into the conversation here once, is it's like it was like a British pantomime. Like if anyone knows what that is, it's like around Christmas time, around the new year, local actors come together and sort of play things that are like in these plays that are like in like the public domain. So like children's stories and sort of like, and the whole dynamic, especially, how you mentioned Q's role, definitely felt very pantomime villain, almost, Disney-esque in how he sort of had like a lot of control over the situation. I mean, as far as my character goes, Troi, I found her a very difficult character to play. Like, especially a character who is a betazoid, a character who sort of like, who feels emotions probably like 100 to 1,000 times more than the other person would, and
who has like a weird indeterminate accent.
Yes, exactly. Which I had no. I mean, like the actress who played her apparently wanted to go for like some generic Eastern European accent, which it's a weird. It's a bit of a weird accent. I have to admit, but I guess like her role in this is that she's trying to be like at the beginning you see the interaction with Vash where she's like, oh well, you see the cat, she kind of doesn't want to get involved, which is how I sort of saw with like the whole love triangle. She's like, oh well, Picard, he's a professional man, and she doesn't often talk about these things to his crew.
They're like almost all the characters in this episode seem to be like all the women characters in this episode are defined in terms of their relationship to Picard and their role in mediating the conflict between Picard and other women, which takes me to Dr. Crusher. So Steffi, like why don't we talk about your perspective about like how Beverly is kind of treated like with a little bit more of a jealous edge in this episode, and just her relationship to Picard in general.
Yeah, it's kind of very interesting. Like, it's weird doing DP because Dramatis Personae, there is not the sex act. It's weird doing Dramatis Personae and kind of playing these roles as an actor, and sometimes you don't realize how large or small the role is in an episode, because of course when we're watching an episode, we see a person through it. They might be sitting in the briefing room, they might be in the background in this scene. But when you actually have a certain number of lines, you kind of realize what they're actually doing in there. And, both my role and Troy's role, it's all weighted towards the beginning. And it's this, it starts off with Troi in this kind of nurturing role, Picard, you've been, your speech was just fine, like a sort of mothering him. And then like Crusher's role was just, I get about 12 lines in this, and I think 11 of them are just being jealous towards Vash, basically. So, and the other one is fixing Worf's arm.
See, I actually kind of read it as like, there's not really that much jealousy from the women going on. It's more just awkwardness because Picard has chosen to keep things from them, or from Beverly particularly.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to contrast that situation with, like, say, I believe it was Cogenitor, where there was that very, healthy and honest discussion between Riker and Troi about how their relationship changes, and, like, them sort of just being very open about, their different affections and partners. And then Picard is just weirdly secretive about, having any kind of relationships with anybody else.
And he forgets tea. He forgets the tea time that he normally has with Crusher, apparently, which is kind of hurtful.
And the
no, actually, Steffi, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. And like in the other half, I mean, there was an article that David shared recently where Gates McFadden was saying that it was actually she and Marina Sirtis knew fencing, and their role in the fight scene at the end was just relegated to dropping pots.
Yeah. I thought that was really, really annoying to see that, because all of the men get to sword fight, and the women just smash pots on heads.
Yeah, that is
ridiculous.
The impression I got was that the men weren't as accomplished with swords as the two women were as well. So it sort of underlined the entire ridiculousness of that scene where the men are swashbuckling. Can you swashbuckle on land? Let's say that. They're buckling swashes like land lubbers, and then the women are just picking up a couple of planters.
Well, the women are
the worst swordsman ever. How does it?
Well, the women have vaginal objects.
I believe the word is yonic.
There you go.
Yonic, yeah.
And the men have phallic objects. So.
Yeah. Also, Vash does get to steal a phallic object and use it as a weapon against a man.
That plays upon the Freudian fear of castration. Leta, we haven't heard from Leta, who played our first officer, but what are your thoughts a bit on
the entire thing?
What? Say that again.
That is one heck of a point to come into a conversation. I'll tell you what.
But as a female actor who's playing a male role, in this particular episode of Dramatis Personae, what are your thoughts on how little they give the women in the actual Star Trek episode to do?
I like that the first time you see him, Vash gets to have an edge over him, and it really.
Wait, sorry. When you see Riker, you mean?
Yeah, he's trying to pick her up, and she knows who he is and what he's doing, and already knows his next pickup line. It's one of the only times that anybody who's female in this episode gets to be in charge of a situation, and I enjoy it immensely. But yeah, we're gonna stand here in our cute little felt hats and drop flowers on people's heads is not Starfleet approved battle protocol.
No.
The whole thing of I'm going to boop and everybody else gets a sword. Riker's got a sword and a quarterstaff, for the love of Pete. I don't understand why he needs both unless we're compensating. I'm just saying.
I will say, to Riker's credit, I kind of like that when Vash shuts him down, he just sort of he doesn't get too crestfallen or offended about it. He just kind of is like, well, that didn't work. I'm going to move on now.
Yeah. No, that is good. But yeah, there's a lot going on here, but it's you miss a lot, I think, because it is such a fun episode that you don't necessarily, unless you're us, pay attention to a lot of the subtext that's going on. Because it's like, oh, look, they're all in cute outfits. No, what a fun story kind of thing. And I think you really have to look at it not just as a piece of entertainment.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a way to sneak in. Go ahead. That's a way to sneak in a little bit of complexity to a story there. So the second you put a felt hat and a feather on somebody, it doesn't feel like you're really dealing with a real person anymore. And suddenly you're allowed to play with those characters in a completely different way. So it's a bit like in Midsummer's Night Dream when you've got the play within the play and whatever. You get to do something that explores something and tells another story. But in this case, I think it actually possibly says more about Q than it does about Picard, because I don't think anybody is surprised that Picard turns out, despite his slightly patriarchal attitude towards women in general in this episode, he actually turns out to be a decent person who doesn't want to see people hurt.
Right.
Whereas Q, on the other hand, is all like, well, you know, blood will be spilt. Let's find out how that plays out. and so what we actually get is revelations about Q rather than Picard. And did we get revelations about Vash? No, we knew that Vash was like this already. I mean, she
doesn't actually change at all. Yeah, she has no transformation in this episode.
Well, apart from possibly into a semi-godlike being.
Yeah, let's talk about the nature of... I'm sorry, can you say that again, Dave?
Well, at the end, Q wasn't there to make her disappear. She disappeared. So, you know, as Q lent her a bit of the old, the Q juice, ready to jump in.
You know, I always find it so... Let's talk about, like, just the general nature of Q as a character, since this is our first Q episode. It is kind of interesting how, like, you know, being that can, you know, theoretically see and conceive all, you know, he always just seems so surprised at, you know, humans who are able to think in non-transactional terms. Like, why do we, like, do we think that there's an in-universe reason for him being so surprised, or is it just for the convenience of the writers being able to use Q as a device to, like, you know, tell stories about the nobility of humanity? Like, what? That's an open question for anybody who wants to comment.
Well, I'll say that for me, like, I thought it was very interesting that Q shows up in safari gear. Like, to me, there's sort of like a layer of the story that's about colonialism. You know, the fact that Vash is stealing artifacts, the fact, you know, and Safari is also about stealing, you know, living artifacts. You know, there's a way in which I think that Q wants to communicate to humans that, like, we think that we've moved on from the sort of tendency towards capitalism, when in fact, you know, it's the only way that these characters can relate. Even in the Robin Hood story, you know, you have a kind of socialist character who's at odds with that, you know.
Relevant to note, the teleplay of this episode was by Ira Stephen Behr, who, you know, is one of the reasons why Deep Space Nine was as amazing as it was.
Mm-hmm. I think what you're saying there is, it reminds me of the stories we hear still today about cultural tourism. So this, by which I don't mean just when people go to another country and experience that culture. I mean, so there was an example that I thought was particularly poignant in the UK, which was around the fetishization of what's known as chavs in the gay community. So chavs are generally considered to be tracksuit-suited, poorer members of the community. And there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff about how that stereotype is constructed. But there was this entire rise of what was known as chav porn, and having chav nights at gay clubs. And really what you saw here was the wealthy middle classes going and sort of experiencing a bit of rough trade, just to pick up on something somebody else has said, for a night without actually having to truly take on that culture. It's a transactional element of that culture. We see this in appropriation in Native American stuff as well. Mm-hmm. This entire, if it's for my benefit, I can exploit your culture and your reality to give me some kind of transient pleasure.
I feel like that's Q to a T,
that's
right?
Q, exactly who that is.
Okay, so Q is like a cultural tourist who likes appropriating the meaner, less enlightened aspects of humanity, so that way it gives him a break from his boring omnipotence. Is that the consensus I'm hearing here?
Well, I kind of hear that he's projecting, you know? in the way that he sort of has a very and of course, like he's kind of an outcast in Q society, right? In the sense that like he's a maverick in that society too. So like, I think what I'm hearing vis-a-vis what I said is kind of like Q is entirely that he's a cultural appropriator. He's a cultural tourist, and I think it annoys him that humankind still has these impulses, and that's why he's so obsessed with them.
But it seems there seems to be a commonality with a lot of antagonist characters, and whether or not you think Q is a villain, he's definitely an antagonist. It's this attitude of, this is the way I am, therefore everyone else is like this too. And if they're not, they're pretending not to be. I think a lot of times Q is trying to push Picard into revealing, you see, humanity is still just as horrible as I'm, as you know, is still as selfish and imperialist as, you know, as I am. That but at the same time,
like a depressed person who lashes out trying to convince other people that the world sucks as much as they are viewing it during, you know, like saying, I'm speaking from my personal perspective, is, you know, when I've been in like deep and depressive episodes, sometimes I tend to like want to convince other people like, why are you so hopeful about how shitty the world is?
Right.
Also, isn't
he's got the whole.
No, Randall, you want to go?
Sorry.
Wait a second. No, you go. You can go first.
Okay. It's interesting when he shows up, Q, that
sorry, Carl, you're speaking very quietly. Can you there? Oh, Zach. Sorry. Yeah. Can you get a little closer to your microphone?
Louder.
Yeah. There we go.
Sure. Is that better?
Yes.
So the interesting thing is when he shows up, his whole purpose for being there is to pay back a favor to Picard, which is gnawing at him. So even though he likes to think he's above all of these lesser things that he keeps seeing in humankind, his whole reason for being there is to try and wipe his conscience clean. You know, he's trying to pay back a debt because he's still in that way of thinking too. You know, it's all part of what he is.
Well, yeah, he doesn't like he needs things to be balanced out, because otherwise he lives with this perpetual proof that humans are capable of greater empathy than he is willing to exhibit himself.
Right, because he doesn't really understand charity and helping out other people, because, you know, if he's real omnipotence and he's just passive, then he literally has the ability to snap his finger and like make a bunch of good things happen.
That leads me to an interesting question that that's sometimes posed in some Star Trek episodes, where it's like, let's say it's like this sort of hypothetical question that like, if humans become too removed from struggling for survival, whether it be through, you know, technology creating too much, you know, material comfort, or you know, just too much harmony, like will empathy and like the recognition or like the need to protect other people from suffering wither away. I get like there are some episodes where it's like we encounter like very technologically advanced and prosperous, you know, societies who you know, end up having some kind of awful lack of empathy, like say in the original series, The Ultimate Computer, where it's like the society is idyllic, but then it's like the computer decides who lives and who dies. Question. Dave, go ahead.
So I literally, the other side of my computer screen just there, I've got a picture of, or a caricature of Picard sat in his chair, surrounded by tribbles. And it says, a species can only survive if we have obstacles to overcome. And this is one of the things...
Wait, Kirk, not Picard.
Did I say Picard? I mean...
You said Picard.
They're all the same, basically, aren't they? He blasphemed live on air. So this reminded me of that as well, in the sense that like Vash's character almost feels like she needs to create these obstacles for her to overcome. because maybe there's this thing against having a life that's too easy. You know, we saw Worf a few episodes ago, very upset that on Risa people weren't taking the threat of terrorism seriously enough,
right,
to the point where he decided he'd engage a bit of terrorism himself.
There's also, like, in episodes of Deep Space Nine with the Maquis, I think there's comments about, like, the reason why the Federation, like, doesn't feel sympathy for us is because Earth is a paradise, and they don't know what it's like for us struggling on the frontier where it's not yet paradise.
And so I wonder if people like Vash are, like, trying to regain, to come back to a conversation we had offline earlier, not on this conversation here, but, you know, this sort of Wild West nature where people are looking for their own adventures and they want to create something out of it, and they want to create their own new mythos. So I wonder, I mean, Star Trek clearly is a product of American culture rather than sort of, you know, world culture. So I wonder if this sort of, and you know, Roddenberry literally said it's wagon train to the
wagon
stars.
train. Yeah, no, that's an absolutely accurate statement.
So I wonder really if this is a sort of an example of that sort of frontier thought, like the American mythos of the cowboy who's taming the West and the pioneers. And actually Vash is just somebody who's finding the gaps between the law and the way things are at the moment and trying to exploit them for their own benefit.
Casey, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I actually, it reminded me of, you know, in the opening of TNG, they say, you know, going where no one has gone before. But that's an inherently colonialist statement because there are people there already who live there.
Yeah,
you're going to their home. They already are there.
Somebody sent me a screen cap of a tweet. I forgot who it was, but it said, like, you can tell Star Trek was written by white guys because it says to boldly go where no man has gone before, and people are already there.
There is a little bit of a colonialist kind of tinge to Starfleet, I think.
There's a parody of Star Trek called Star Trek, and in that the captain says, "These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its mission to cruise around the universe looking for novel predicaments to get into, to search the outskirts of the galaxy for areas with less crowding, lower tax rates, and better schools, to boldly go where nobody wanted to go before." And I do wonder if sometimes that might be a more accurate description of what they're actually doing. I mean, Picard's rate of adventures to boring administrative episodes is pretty high compared with some of the other crews.
That's true. That's true. Well, I think, you know, we're about to come up on the hour here, so I think this would be a good time to wrap things up. But before we do that, I want to announce the next episode we're doing. So in 2 weeks, it's time to have Faith of the Heart will take me out of faith to believe. We're doing Enterprise again.
Well, I don't believe anymore. I just don't believe anymore. I've lost all my faith after that.
We are doing.
Maybe we need to get Max as Geordi as Elena Dale playing.
Back up with the mandolin, hell yeah.
we are traveling back to not only the past as far as the Star Trek prequel, but like the past as far as that prequel's past, because we're doing a Carbon Creek, a lovely Star Trek's cottagecore episode, if I dare say. So that's going to be in 2 weeks. Every fortnight, we stream live on Facebook. If you are watching the recording of this or you haven't had a chance yet, please go down, Tiltify, donate to Transgender Law Center, and, you know, just follow, like us on Facebook. We've got a Twitter. I think it's @DramatisTrek. Is that the Twitter? Yes, @DramatisTrek. I think we should do an Instagram just because I'm mostly on Instagram and not on Twitter. So we should make that.
I just heard Angel volunteer to do our Instagram.
Yeah. I just got voluntold. I could do that. Is Dramatis Trek the Twitter? Yeah, Dramatis Trek everywhere. All right, cool. I want to give a lovely, once again, another round of thanks and applause to our crew. Narrator, Zack Coates, Picard, Becks Flatt, Troi, Olivia Astrid, Vash, Casey Lowry, Crusher, Steffi, Riker, Leta Chrisman, Crewman, Randall C. Brown, LaForge, Maksim Rex, Data, Ben Church, Worf, Lael Newton, Q, Robbie Laughton, Sir Guy, JB Flatt, Nursie, David X. Crowe, our wonderful producer on the ones and twos, Carl St. Lucie, and I, as the voice of the computer, and most importantly, as your host this episode and every episode, Angel M. Castillo, hope to see you in 2 weeks. In the meantime, ex astris beatitudo, and live long and prosper.